Right, so hi everyone, I'm Natalie and I am currently an intern at Ermak Northwest, which is the Research Institute for Marine Spatial Planning and is located in St. Petersburg. And today I'm going to introduce you to marine spatial planning and what it is. Yeah, so for the majority of people, this is what the sea and the ocean look like. It's an empty space with some ripples and just blue. However, the seas are not deserts, not at all. They are very busy places. Not only they're busy with life, with ecosystems. Here I have an example of the most famous ecosystem everyone knows. It's a coral reef somewhere in the Indo-Pacific. But there are, of course, more. There are different types. There are kelp forests and there's deep sea. There are mangroves, estuaries and intertidal zones. And humans are making use of the oceans as well, as we have to ship our things and goods across the world, connecting countries. With the most recent example of how we are dependent on that having happened, I believe, last year with the container ship being stuck in the Suez Canal. We also, most importantly, we have to feed humans and our population. So we fish and we harvest the fish resources of the sea. We have also started fish farming, which is a controversial topic since it is solving a lot of issues, but it is also creating and contributing to other issues. We are harvesting our energy from the ocean, be it the oil, as we are still currently dependent on it. So we keep getting oil from the oceans and seas, and that does not necessarily, that still has an effect on the ecosystems as well. As you probably remember, in 2010, the Deep Sea Horizon accident that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, with ecosystems and local coastal populations suffering to this day. And we're also, with the development of the offshore energy, we keep using the oceans, and while this is perceived as more environmentally friendly than the ocean exploration, it also still has its problems. There's always there's a clash between fishing in the offshore wind areas, and there's also a lot of evidence suggesting that the wind turbines have an effect on the populations of various species and animals, for example, sharks, or sometimes langoustines, if they are located in the wrong place, where they affect the development, which can later affect also the fishing industry. And last but not least is, of course, the military use of the sea, as a lot of training and tests are carried out in the sea. For example, when the test explosions are carried out, that obviously affects the marine life, and it also sometimes maybe it doesn't just kill organisms in the nearby, but it also creates additional noise pollution, so it affects marine mammals particularly. All of these activities, they all have consequences. So currently the oceans and the seas are in a somewhat sad state, as they always have to, they face a lot of problems. So marine pollution, particularly with plastic, as I'm sure everyone has heard of or keeps hearing of. Things are slowly getting done about it. Maybe you have heard about the Ocean Cleanup Project and all the initiatives on reducing plastic and using reusable things. However, for now, the pollution is still there, and it's still happening, and it is going to continue to happen for some time. This is a photo of coral rubble, which is essentially dead coral in the place where they used to be luxurious, lush, very rich coral garden. This happens due to ocean acidification, which is another issue that the oceans face today. It happens because of climate change and the overabsorption of CO2 by the oceans. And corals are actually habitat building systems of the ocean, so they're crucial. And the conservation and preservation of corals is of the highest importance. Noise pollution is another important topic not to ignore, as the noise from all the ship and all the human activity, all the ships and all the human activity in the ocean really interferes with, for example, marine mammals and roots of whales and other things. It's actually very interesting how during the lockdown, the first lockdown in March 2020, the reduction of human activity in the ocean has created incredible conditions for some of the researchers in marine mammal sciences to watch their behavior when not interfered by noise from ships and everything else. So there should be also regulations on how noisy the motors can be. Dredging is another big part. Dredging is the process by which the sediment, for example, the sandy bottoms, so sand in particular, is taken from one place and then is taken to another. A good example would be the dredging in the area of Singapore, where Singapore is taking a lot of sand from Cambodia and therefore reducing a lot, like extensively reducing the areas of mangrove forests and everything that comes with it. That includes food and means of existence for local communities and people. And I'm also not mentioning that actually dredging, while bringing sediment to another places, it also triggers a process of sedimentation, which is when ecosystems and live organisms get covered in sediment that prevents their nutrition and light in some cases. So it obviously affects the health. Overfishing is a very big one. On this particular photo, it's the fishing of orange roughy, which is a protected species. And a couple of years ago, there was a scandal with the certification of a fishery in New Zealand as sustainable when it is very clearly not. Overfishing has a lot of scary effects and consequences. It sort of undermines the security. It undermines the food security for now and for the future. Therefore, regulating fishing is very important, but fisheries management is a whole separate topic with a lot of other problems, and as anything, it gets more and more complicated when different countries are involved. And in addition, where there is overfishing and fishing, there is bycatch, which continues to happen. Unfortunately, it continues to harm species that either are not edible or not very well. We do more damage by killing them than by preserving them, as always. For example, sharks. Sharks are a big topic with not only their victims of bycatch, but they're also being severely overfished and the populations are being depleted, all because of a weird belief in shark fin soup and other mysterious advantages that you can get from consuming any shark products. And eutrophication is a very big topic globally. It happens from the nutrients runoff from farms, and they get into the ocean with groundwaters. Fish farming is another source of local eutrophication, as nutrients and pollution runoff from the farms, and then that triggers the excessive algal bloom, which in turn blocks the light from the sun, and creates zones with no oxygen, and essentially everything underneath that level, that layer of light blocking, just dies of asphyxiation. And of course, not last yet. Yeah, deep sea mining is a new thing, and it is, well, it's a relatively new thing, but it's a hot topic currently, because as it is relatively new, there's still not enough legislation on it. It's very hard to regulate it and to control it. Because deep sea mining is happening at a very difficult to access level, there's not enough evidence and science to support the damage that it's doing. But we do know that it can have very negative effects on the future of the deep sea habitats, as those are very low level of low energy habitats, and it takes them a lot of time to recover, way more time to recover than it takes us to mine the deep sea. And yes, last but not least is the climate change, which, as I'm sure you've all heard about, it's happening, and this summer is another piece of evidence, more tangible for everyone. Climate change, for now we can't know what exactly is going to happen and how specifically it will affect different species and ecosystems, but some of the effects are bad already, and has a very negative potential in the future. To somehow approach the solution to all of these problems, the United Nations has come up with, in 2015, I think, it has come up with the so-called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a common plan for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, for the future and also for the present. And at the heart of it are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, here. These goals, they are an urgent call for action by all countries, both developed and developing. And the sustainability, the goals for sustainable development, they recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations, such as no access to education and health, all of these must go hand in hand with environmental conservation and climate action. The sustainable development goal that we are most interested in our industry is number 14, life below water, which calls for protection of our oceans and seas. And we believe that a very important tool to develop, or not even the tool, but the strategy to tackle this particular goal, is to develop coherent marine policy on ocean governance. And it should happen globally. So the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as OECD, recommend that there are 3 pillars to achieve policy coherence. So first is a strategic vision for implementing sustainable development goals. And it should be supported by political commitment and leadership. The second one is inclusive governance. This means that all sectors of the economy and sociocultural sectors as well are involved, and all of it is involved on different levels. And effective tools to anticipate, assess, and address impacts of policies. So this is where marine spatial planning comes in, because marine spatial planning is is such a tool that allows to anticipate, assess, and address domestic, transboundary, and long-term impacts of policies. Because as you probably know, because this is not just in policy that this happens everywhere, be it a presentation at the university or another project at work, people find it hard to agree on things. And well, this comes from a diversity of backgrounds and misunderstanding of each other. As I mentioned before, the oceans are a very busy place and with a lot of stakeholders and industries involved. So if you look at plans of marine space, they often look like this. These are maps with spatial, not marine spatial plans, but these are maps of activity happening in these regions, and you can see that they are very busy and is really interested in the space, and everyone wants it for themselves. In the end, we have what we have in our oceans, destroyed and being destroyed like continually. I see marine spatial planning as a structure for cleaning this mess up and making things more organized and in order. But UNESCO defines marine spatial planning as a public process that brings together multiple stakeholders to make informed decisions about the use of space to achieve ecological, economic, and social objectives that are usually specified through a political process. So is the key takeaway from here is that it is a public process, meaning that everyone should be involved in it, should be open and transparent. Science should be involved and it should inform decisions about the use of space. And this way it will lead to a coherent structure. So an outcome of marine spatial planning, because I understand it can be sometimes hard to grasp what it is, an outcome of marine spatial planning normally is a document like these. For example, I took Scotland's National Marine Plan and New York Ocean Action Plan. It's a coherent document which contains information on what area they're focusing on, or what it contains an overview of ecosystems and sectors and industries that are located in these areas, and it contains a structured plan on how to guide all these activities in a way that will benefit everyone but not harm the environment. So, for example, notice how Scotland's National Marine Plan is focusing on the Scottish seas rather than being full UK plan. And New York Ocean Action Plan focuses on the area that is adjacent to the state of New York, not just the city. These are some intakes from the inside of the Scotland's National Marine Plan. For example, on the map, you can see the location of marine cultural heritage sites, things such as shipwrecks or sometimes plane wrecks. It can also include lighthouses and memorials. It's a whole separate, in Scotland it is, and many other places it is, a separate authority that has formed an essentially another body for control of these sites, and is also an important stakeholder. So after presenting the information on what the area is and what the area contains and what activity is happening in the area, planning policies are developed with advice for everyone, sector by sector. So if it is still not obvious how marine spatial planning connected to blue growth, what unites marine spatial planning and essentially what makes it a very important part on the way to blue growth is it's the notion that both marine spatial planning and blue growth share that the socioeconomic growth can and must happen in harmony with environmental sustainability. This is why at heart of marine spatial planning must be the ecosystem-based management, which I realize I am actually giving quite a lot of definitions, but this is a key concept in marine spatial planning and must be implemented and taken into account always and everywhere. So for many people still, ecosystem-based management is a mysterious expression, not self-explanatory. According to National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, also known as NOAA in the US, defines ecosystem-based management as an integrated management approach that recognizes the full array of interactions within an ecosystem, including humans, rather than considering single issue species or ecosystem services in isolation. In other words, ecosystem-based management looks at the system of things involved together rather than managing one species. For example, if you see a decline in a population of dolphins in an area, rather than looking at the mitigation measures for increasing the population and to bring it back to its healthy number, it should give reason to study and look at what caused this and how this affects the wider ecosystem. Maybe something's going on with food sources. Maybe it's the season. Maybe there's health issues. Maybe something else unknown before is causing this. How does this affect the other food web? Is this meaning more fish, or is it a signal that there's less fish? To make it a little bit more clear, ecosystem-based management has 4 properties. First of all, it strives to protect biodiversity. It aims to maintain ecosystem health, which are, of course, related biodiversity in marine sciences and in marine areas. Biodiversity is always a sign of ecosystem health, and it feeds one into another. The more biodiverse a system is, the more resilient it is. The more resilient it is, the more biodiverse it is. Very importantly, ecosystem-based management recognizes that humans are a component of the ecosystem, and it takes humans and humans' needs into consideration. And another very important aspect is that ecosystem-based management means that it is adaptive. So there's consistent scientific evidence and monitoring is going in, and it consistently and coherently feeds into the political process of managing the ecosystem. And yeah, this should be at heart of marine spatial planning. And as a tool, marine spatial planning has many advantages. They are distributed into 4 groups. It's economic benefits, ecological benefits, social benefits. I'm very sorry, I said 3 groups, yes. Economic benefits should never be, and they cannot be ignored. Marine spatial planning helps to create certainty for the private sector and for investment planning, often with a 30-year lifetime, which is, you know, everyone likes certainty, particularly in our times. Yeah, so the next one is that marine spatial planning provides the structure, and because of that, it can identify compatible uses within the same area for development. For example, a recent development that I'm personally a fan of, it has found that oysters that it is possible to combine marine spatial planning, marine protected areas with areas closed off for offshore wind farms. and breeding oysters there is a great way to restore, for example, the wild oysters population in the North Sea. It reduces conflicts among incompatible users and between users and nature. So yeah, as I've shown you before, it's very hard for people to agree on things, and marine spatial planning, being an inclusive process, includes everyone, and as such reduces the conflicts. It streamlines permitting processes because as it gives structure to all of the activity going on in the area, it also defines what should be permitted where. And all of this together leads to promotion of efficient use of resources and space. The next group of benefits is ecological benefits, which, yeah, I put economic benefits first because I know that people care about economy and it's very obvious. However, ecological benefits should never be the last in the chain of priorities. And as marine spatial planning should include ecosystem-based management, it should consider ecological benefits as one of the first priorities as well. And it should start with identifying areas of biological and ecological importance. For example, here we know, here we have a nursing ground of, well, nephrops or langoustines, as you know them. So we cannot place wind farms here because we know that later the fishing industry will be affected when they will not be able to harvest good, healthy nephrops. Biodiversity objectives can be, and as I personally believe they must be, at the heart of marine spatial planning, as we're all very dependent on these ecosystems, sometimes more than we suspect. Because it can identify areas and set biodiversity objectives, it can allocate the special spaces for biodiversity and nature conservation. And in that way, it offers a planning context for marine protected area networks, which I believe should be, again, like the base layer structure for everything. And it reduces cumulative impacts of human users on marine ecosystems. And then, yes, the social benefits. Because, well, social benefits is a very logical next step from economic and ecological benefits. As a society, we do depend on both. Marine spatial planning improves opportunity for community and citizen participation. That is the way it should be done. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is ignored, and I'm about to talk about that as well. But citizens and local communities should be involved in marine spatial planning as much as possible. So it identifies impacts of decisions on the allocation of ocean space. For example, if you're designating recreational areas, for example, for surfing or just swimming or snorkeling or diving. And yeah, another bit that I mentioned earlier is the preservation of cultural heritage. And well, overall, it creates this effect of, not effect, but like it preserves social and spiritual values related to ocean use. Yes, unfortunately, it is not always possible to, not that it is not always possible, it's just not always done, that the community is involved in the process. However, it is specifically sociocultural factors that provide the basis for engaging the public. Here you see a picture of what I believe is a Maori person on a traditional boat at sea in Polynesia. The reason this particular photo is here is because there's a very good example of how local and tribal communities in New Zealand have been extensively involved in marine spatial planning, and their traditional knowledge that they have accumulated for centuries has come in hand when planning ecologically important areas and zones. So to better understand what MSP is, it is crucial to understand what it does not do. Unfortunately, marine spatial planning does not solve everything. It is important to understand that marine spatial planning is not a solution to everything. It is a part, it is a tool of coherent and structural good ocean governance. Marine spatial planning can provide structure and guides how policies should develop, but it is not a policy in its own. It's not a law. Marine spatial planning does not replace sectoral planning, and it still requires fully inclusive participation and needs to include socio-cultural factors as well, as I mentioned before. Because yes, that's what pushes public engagement. As marine spatial planning is not a policy on its own, it is not a law, it does not give a developer or any other stakeholder permission to use the marine space. There are still licensing and permitting processes in place, and well, they are, with good marine spatial planning, they should be more organized. The next one is that, yeah, marine spatial planning is not a one-time thing. It's not like, oh, we developed this plan now and this is what we're going to follow. No, science should be monitoring and happening consistently. Every stakeholder should review their activity consistently and coherently and constantly feed it into the process, into the cycle of marine spatial planning, including different changes in decisions and benefits and everything, as the world is not standing. Marine spatial planning is not just drawing beautiful maps and lines on it. It goes on different levels. Not only it takes into consideration different levels of sea space, it takes into consideration the water column, the water surface, the sea bottom, the ecosystems. It helped to define the rules and principles based on the ecosystems and who and how wants to use the space. Well, I skipped to this bit that marine spatial planning takes in multiple administrative boundaries, and it takes different levels of the sea itself. And unfortunately, like anything, marine spatial planning is not without risk of being a highly politicized process with powerful stakeholders outranking other users. As much as I wish it was more, as much as I wish the scientific community was the one with more say and in the process, it does not always happen that way, and everyone has their own vision of what should be done and how and where. So to organize the marine spatial planning process, UNESCO has come up with 10 steps that break down the process. The first one is establishing authority, which is, it's a problematic step on its own. To successfully achieve or like make this step, it's important to consider the problems that you want to solve first. Like, what are we doing? Where are we doing? Why are we doing it? It's important to understand what kind of authority you need, or maybe you already have one for developing and also implementing marine spatial planning. Sometimes, but that's not necessarily always happening this way. Sometimes new legislation has to be created to establish a new authority. And sometimes maybe an existing authority can be used or modified to implement the process. The second one is the obtaining financial support, which I think is an important step in anything. It's important to estimate costs of the marine spatial planning activities and identify finance mechanisms. And then you can implement government revenue, including user fee systems, grants and donations, industry revenues. For example, we're going to mention the China later as well, but the user fee system in China is a very good example, because China's law on the management of sea use considers its sea to be a state-owned asset. Therefore, all users must pay for its use, with 30% going directly to the state as revenue toward marine development, protection, and management. So in 10 years between 2004 and 2014, China has collected over 61 billion RMBs, which makes yes, approximately 10 billions in US dollars just from user fees. Step 3 is organizing the MSP process. You need to form the team and develop a work plan. So identify desired skills, but also tasks and sequences and milestones. You need to define principles, goals, and objectives. That leads to like a political process and different marine spatial planning types, which I'm not going to mention today. And as like in any working process, you need to specify boundaries and time frames. When all of this is done, you can go on to the next step. You can go on to the next step and engage stakeholders. Stakeholders they're individuals or groups or organizations that are already, or maybe they will be affected or involved or interested by marine spatial planning implementation. This does not mean that they will be affected by it positively. It does not by default mean that they will be affected negatively. They will just be affected by it in some way. So often examples of stakeholders would be well, wind energy sector or oil companies operating in the region, coastal communities, fishermen, the military sector, and many others. These are just, yeah. So you need to identify your stakeholders and then trigger the engagement process. The next step is to analyze existing conditions. That includes mapping important biological, ecological areas, maybe creating, well, no, sorry, I'm very sorry. At this step, you're not creating anything yet. You're just mapping biologically significant areas, for example, nursery grounds, or maybe traveling routes, and so on and so forth. And then you identify spatial conflicts and compatibilities. So for example, if here we have a route where baleen animals cross, we should move the container routes from here. And you also map existing areas of human activities. So yeah, the same example with whales and shipping routes. So then you need to, once you're done with analyzing present conditions, you can move on to future conditions. You need to ask yourself, what would happen if the business as usual scenario went ahead. That means what's going to happen if we don't implement any new management strategies? And what would happen if alternative strategies went ahead? That means what would happen if new ideas would be planned and implemented? How would that affect the existing conditions? Based on that, you decide what is the best scenario, and based on this scenario, you develop the plan. Very important at this point, I think I should say that it is always important to include climate change in developing the plan, because policy coherence, as I said earlier, is important. Climate change will affect the existing conditions in the future. For example, it can change the abundance of food in the ocean because some species will be more resilient to it than others. It can affect the routes of their migration. For example, I believe there is some evidence that krill might shift its presence, as well as salmon might change its migration route upwards as well towards the North Pole. Yes, step 8, you implement the plan, which is well, it's like the executive power. It's like the executive branch of power. You should have the same authority that is that was established in step 1 should be responsible for implementing the plan. That means maybe putting in place the decided user fee system, or maybe limiting the access to such and such area, maybe introducing quotas for fishing for particular species in different areas, so on and so forth. And evaluating performance should be step 9, which is when you constantly monitor whether your actions have affected the existing conditions in any way and whether they're giving you the results that you were hoping for. If not, and if anything new is happening or coming out from this, you should adapt the process. And this is how eventually the cycle of marine spatial planning is happening. I'm going to go to the examples, the successful cases of marine spatial planning in the world. Here you can see the before and after of marine spatial planning in Wuyan Bay in China. As I talked about this earlier, China has introduced user fee system here as well. So it has led to a functional zoning of Wuyan Bay, and in the end, China created different fees for using the marine area for different sectors, for different stakeholders, in fact. And as a result, the industrial zone has moved away from the shore, together with rice fields that have disappeared, and instead today we have tourism developing in the area. This is another example. This is the Massachusetts marine spatial planning. I loved it very much because, well, this is ecosystem-based management in practice. The migration routes of baleen whales, specifically, I believe this is the humpback whale here. Yeah, their routes have been taken into consideration when developing the plan. And as a result, as whales are creatures particularly sensitive to noise pollution, and they directly interfere with the shipping routes because they very often crash into with ships from motors, and they are injured or they die. The policy was implemented according to which the shipping routes have been shifted from away from where the aggregations of whales happen. So an ecosystem component, the whales have been taken into consideration, and that has affected the rest of the planning. And yeah, this is ecosystem-based management at its best. So in Russia, marine spatial planning is only at the start. It's only beginning its life, but hopefully it will be long and prosperous. Our project platform for marine spatial planning is called Capacity for MSP, and it started its life in the Baltic region. And yeah, it has different aims. Has the aim of, well, not only enhancing, but even creating the marine management framework through stakeholder engagement and collaboration, and development of the MSP roadmap for Russia, as always based on adaptation of international practices. And well, maybe hopefully we can bring something of our own into this field. The main output will be and is the marine spatial planning roadmap for Russia. The current developers of the Capacity for MSP is the Research Institute of Marine Spatial Planning, Ermak Northwest, as well as Russian State Hydrometeorological University. And currently the number of developers is growing. And we are being supported in this by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of the Russian Federation, and in some cases also the Ministry of Education of Russia. And that's it.
Спасибо, Наташа. Я так понимаю, что вас не зря учили в Эдинбурге. Вы прекрасно рассказали морское планирование. Я думаю, у коллег сложилось понимание, что это за процесс. Хочу сказать, что несколько лет назад Всемирный фонд природы разработал пособие, брошюру «Как стать морским специалистом за 10 минут». Она должна быть на сайте CCB, кстати. Вот, так поскольку там за 10 минут, а Наташа говорила 50, я думаю, что я уже свободно могу назвать вас всех коллегами. Это первое замечание, которое я хотел сделать. Второе. Процесс становления морского планирования идет, так же, как и вообще отношение к морю с давних времен. Когда-то решали этот процесс кулаком и дубиной, потом как-то стали начинать договариваться. Ну, на такие плотные рельсы он поставлен примерно 10 лет назад на Балтике, когда Хелком и ВАСАП, вы наверняка знаете эти организации, создали совместную рабочую группу по морскому планированию, и она стала регулировать процесс, координировать действия между государствами, между странами, начиная от методической базы. Законы каждая страна принимает сама, начиная от методической базы и заканчивая практическим рассмотрением выполненных планов и координации этих планов между собой. Вот нам кажется, что страны Европейского Союза настолько монолитная семья, что все решается просто и легко. На самом деле разработанные планы показали, что очень много разночтений в подходах и в результатах у разных стран. Но к чести Европейского Союза и балтийских стран должен сказать, что эти все разночтения были преодолены в ходе разработки и согласования решения пространственных планов. Ну, кстати, я забыл отметить, что определенную роль, не маленькую роль в становлении морского планирования в рамках вот этой рабочей группы играл лично Михаил Дуркин, за что ему спасибо. Он, правда, сбежал впоследствии на работу по укреплению экологической роли общественных организаций, но, тем не менее, то, что делал он, то осталось и до конца. Еще что я хотел отметить, ну, процесс развивается, Наталья сказала, что он идет и в России, и в рамках новой дорожной карты, в общем, если вы помните то, что нам было показано, по-моему, шаг 7 или 8, это планы внедрения. Так вот, морское это в шагах ЮНЕСКО. И действительно, сейчас вот новая дорожная карта на Балтике, которая разрабатывается, она как бы потихоньку переходит от, собственно, морского планирования, координации планов действий, планов управления действиями стран на Балтийском море. Морское планирование уже включено в состав инструментов плана действий по Балтийскому морю. Он сейчас тоже пересматривается, вероятно, к концу года будет принят. И, в общем, надо сказать, что это станет полноправным инструментом широкого пользования, и мы надеемся, что он пойдет широко по всему миру. Ну, отчасти, вот, да, хороший пример, Наташа говорила про горбатых хитов в Америке. У нас, кстати, похоже, с ними ситуация была вблизи Сахалина. Нефтедобыча и места размножения китов накладывались друг на друга. Но благодаря правозащитникам, не правозащитникам, а защитникам природы, ситуация была разрешена. То есть работы вот на этих месторождениях, буровые работы, которые особенно шумные и вредят китам и движению транспорта, оно было закрыто на период как раз вот, когда киты занимались воспроизводством в этих районах. Ну и последний момент, на который я хочу обратить внимание, это взаимодействие суши и моря. Ну, очень разные бывают моменты взаимодействия. Вот с одним мы столкнулись, когда проводили игру по морскому планированию. У нас есть такое направление в Ненецком округе, это крайний север, это Печорское море. Одна группа там развивала морской туризм, используя как отправные точки для прокладки маршрутов, в том числе места древних религиозных обрядов, капища. Но потом встал местный житель и сказал, что бы вы тут ни планировали, на наши капища мы вас не пустим. Это наши святые места, и идите вы со своими туристами куда-нибудь подальше. Ну, это такой вот локальный пример. А если говорить глобально, то от 70 до 85% загрязнения, я сужу по нашему Финскому заливу, восточной части, в море попадает со стоками рек. И то, что мы делаем на берегу, вот это те самые 80% того, что дает результат на море. Касается ли это загрязнений или, наоборот, касается очистки моря. Но настолько неразрывно связаны эти действия, что я вообще являюсь сторонником того, чтобы территориальные планы и морские пространственные планы разрабатывались совместно, поскольку только в этом случае мы можем заранее предусмотреть последствия хозяйственной деятельности на берегу и подправить то, что на берегу неудачно. Касается ли это городских стоков, касается ли это стоков с полей или наводческих ферм, или еще каких-нибудь проблем и неприятностей береговой деятельности. Вот то, что я хотел добавить. Наташа, еще раз вам спасибо. Спасибо Михаилу. Мне очень нравится девиз сегодняшнего, этой сессии всей, наша общая Балтика. Нам никуда не деться, это действительно наша общая Балтика.